there's this thing in the developer world that you meet any developer who's independent, they're like, marketing's a dirty word, like it's disgusting, you don't want to do SEO and marketing. And I used to feel like exactly like that, because you think there's some kind of pride in building this app and getting it out there organically and, you know, no marketing and whatever. It's like a badge of honor, but it's really stupid. Like if you're trying to run a business, if people don't know about what you're doing, you're just being insane. Like you're making it really difficult for yourself.
Russell, thank you so much for joining me for our next episode of Be The Drop.
My pleasure.
It's great to be here on site.
I know, look at this place.
We're in the world of podcasts or pocket casts.
Yes, this is where Pocket Cast is made. I'd like to pretend there's some sort of grand studio around us that we're in, but there's not really.
Well, for those of for our listeners, there is a grand studio right around us. We can paint the picture.
We can. It's huge. It spans multiple stories. It's our empire, basically, podcasting empire.
To get us started, to tell us a little bit about your empire, whether it be physically real or not, you've got an item of significance with you.
I have, yes.
So if you could introduce that item, tell us about it and how it tells a bit about your story and your community.
Yeah, so can I nerd out on you a little bit?
Yeah, I'll do it.
I have with me the very first iPhone ever made. So this one actually never made it to Australia. It was released only in the US. I was an enterprise developer at the time. This thing had come out and no one knew anything about it, right? So I convinced my brother-in-law to import a whole bunch from the States. We sold some on eBay and we kept some for ourselves. I'll never forget the day this arrived in my house. It was all of us sitting on these two couches. We're just kind of sitting there. We only had two phones and we're just tapping away for like hours on end. It was just something magical about I know it sounds stupid now, but the whole interaction of like everything your finger does, like the screen would follow it. You could tell that this was something else and this was going to like, you know, change a whole bunch of industries, which it ended up doing.
Yeah,
so
and this is cool. Like this is amazing to hold this. But from there, Pocket Cast is down the track. Is this linked to that somehow? You know, the change in behaviours, that ability to have, you know, access to apps.
On that phone, when they first released it, there were no apps. Like there was no app store. There was nothing you could do. It wasn't till a year later that they actually released that. But I remember when the App Store came out, I think normally as a developer you'd ignore that kind of thing because you're busy, you've got a full-time job, you're doing other stuff. But it was the experience of having played with this thing a year earlier and sort of having it as my main phone. I'm like, no, I think there's something here. So a friend and I actually got together and we made a weather app. That's funnily enough where Pocket Cast started. We made an Australian weather app of all things. It went to number one in the store. It was number one for quite a few weeks. And 2 years later, we actually quit our jobs and we went full time. And that's when we worked on Pocket Cast because we were thinking these devices had moved along sort of in 2 years. They were, I don't know if you remember the black sort of shiny 3GSs and stuff. But at that point, we're like, we need to have our audio listening experience on here because it was very hard. You had to sync it to iTunes. You had to copy all the data across. It was a huge pain. And we're like, as developers, we can try and solve some of this pain for ourselves. And maybe, other people will enjoy that as well.
So when was that? When was Pocket Cast first started?
So this was in 2010. So we were just working part-time. We had the weather app at that stage that was really successful in Australia. I think by 2012, it was on 1 in 5 iPhones in Australia. So it really took off here. And we needed something to do when we went full-time. So 2010, we went full-time. We're like, we're going to do this podcasting, like, let's try it out. And it was actually a complete disaster. Like the sales of it were horrendous for like the first few years. Like we didn't sell many copies at all, but we just kind of kept, plugging away at it because we felt like there was something there that, was good. We just had to kind of refine it down to what it was meant to be.
And so what was happening in the podcast world at that time? Because whilst podcasts existed, they weren't as big then? No,
they weren't as big, and some of them were quite nerdy. I don't know if you've heard of Leo Laporte and his This Week in Tech network. So he was like not a celebrity, but he was on TV over in the US on cable channels. And the cable channel he was on shut down. And he saw the podcasting movement. There was a few others already making podcasts at that time. And he's like, I can make a whole studio out of this. And that's one of the first times I saw like a big organisation, sort of rise up in the podcasting space and actually make content. And then you had the radio stations, obviously, which were really interested in it. They're like, on-demand audio, like this is pretty cool, right? Yeah. And that's where it kind of took off. It wasn't really popular until, the serials of this world sort of came along.
It did definitely. That was a turning point for podcasts. But there was quite a momentum of growth in that time as well.
Yeah, there was. It was quite amazing to see because, Leo wasn't anyone doing it. There was people all over the world doing it. And the cool thing I really loved about podcasting is you could literally grab a microphone, you could sit down wherever on your couch in your house, you could Skype with someone across the world, and you could actually make a podcast about whatever you wanted. And that model, I don't think really existed before that.
No, and that's certainly one of the things that really appealed to me about podcasts. It's like this, you could do it anywhere with very limited equipment, and you can create this content about anything.
Yeah.
I went to Social Media Marketing World in 2015, and John Lee Dumas, so JLD, Entrepreneurs on Fire, was there speaking, and I was just like, oh, I've got to do this. And that was not long after that I had my original chat with you about this.
Yeah, I remember that.
This podcasting thing. Because in Australia, like in America, the market was really getting quite sophisticated. In Australia, it's really only been in the last couple of years that I feel like we've caught up with that. Is that what you've seen?
Yeah, like obviously the ABC got into it in a big way like quite a few years ago, but I see the same with a lot of podcasts like yourself. Like you start off at a point where you're like, I don't know what podcasting is, but I really want to find out more. And all of a sudden a few years later, you've got this professional podcast, you've got listeners, like it's kind of building momentum. I think that's starting to happen in Australia as well.
Yeah, and certainly the other thing that I'm seeing now is that businesses are seeing that there's a space for them to communicate, because we're in such a noisy digital climate where there's so much content. Businesses are now seeing that podcasting, they can actually reach an audience that's interested in their specific niche. As you mentioned, you can make niche content. Yeah,
absolutely. And you're also seeing a rise in branded content, right? So a lot of networks are now doing this thing where like a big company will come to them, like a Ford or a Holden or someone, and they'll say, we don't want to make a podcast about Ford or Holden, but we do want the brand to sort of sit on top of it. And then potentially we want to make, I don't know, some kind of storytelling podcast or some kind of inspirational podcast to sort of tie the brand in with that. I see a lot of sort of companies trying that out as well.
And it's interesting. I recently saw some data that was talking about audio listening numbers, and they were linking things like the decline in Facebook, but then they were having this conversation and marrying that with people are now got speakers in their home. Yeah. So they're saying it's this, there's a mix, this sort of economy that's come together and really providing a space for explosion of audio content.
Yeah, it's made for it, right? Because all these companies already have TV screens in your house, but it's very, you got to sit down, you got to press the button, you got to engage with Netflix or YouTube. There is something about just talking at a speaker and it starts playing something that's a little bit magical. Like I think we're still, it's not the explosion yet, like we're kind of in front of it, but there's the potential there for, if that really takes off, if that becomes the way you listen to audio in your home, it almost becomes a replacement for the radio, I guess. Like, I'm not old enough to remember, but there was a time when people would turn on the wireless like every day and they'd listen to their shows, and that was the way they engaged with audio content. Maybe this is the future of that. We've been fortunate. Like we originally entered the space because we were passionate about podcasting, but little did we know that the entire industry would keep growing. Like since 2010 to 2018 where we are now, it's literally just like a straight line growth of more people listening to podcasts, more people downloading our app, the audience is getting bigger, the podcast sometimes getting more ambitious as well. Like you look at some of the production budgets for some of these new shows and they're really high.
Oh, like S-Town, and I know S-Town was really popular. Like I was seduced by that audio content. It was brilliant.
Yeah.
So then talking about the serials and that of the world, Pocket Cast has recently been purchased.
Yes.
So tell me a bit about that, as much as you can. I assume it's an open conversation.
Yeah, pretty much. So about 12 months ago, we were approached by a set of organisations. So I don't know if you're familiar with National Public Radio in the US, so NPR, WNYC, which is a local broadcaster for New York. There was WBEZ, which is the Chicago public broadcaster, and there's This American Life, which is this strange sort of spin-off from the Chicago public radio. But so these four people got together, and they're all kind of in the same space together. And it was really interesting that those four got together and they kind of reached out to us and they said, hey, look, we see a potential in the podcasting space where there's a few big players that have now got a lot of money behind them, and we're really worried that some of them could come and actually lock down this open ecosystem that we all love and is kind of in our best business interests. And they're like, we'd be curious to know if you share those same concerns, and is there some potential for us to work together? And so we thought we do share some of those same concerns. Like if make a pretend company up. Some pretend company up gets $100 million. They invent some kind of podcasting ecosystem and they somehow manage to lock it down so that you, for example, have to sign content licensing deals with them, and they're potentially exclusive to them, so they couldn't be in apps like Pocket Cast. Like if someone succeeds at doing that, that is quite a concern, not just for us as a business, but also for us as podcast enthusiasts. So we agreed with them. We're like, yeah, there is the potential for this. We'd like to explore this. So for about 2 months, we went backwards and forwards on some kind of partnership potential, and we ummed and ahed about how that would work. And then by the end of that 2 months, it became really obvious that was just too complicated. Like for us to partner with them who are in New York on the other side of the world and
they're already in quite a big partnership.
Yeah, they're in their own partnership, and there's a lot of complexities in how they run their businesses and how the restrictions they're already under because a lot of them are public funded. We just said, look, this is getting too complicated. Like we have aligned goals, but this is not going to work. And then they came back to us a few weeks later and said, hey, look, we understand that doesn't work. What about an acquisition instead? Where we'll buy Pocket Casts and we'll sort of set it up as an independent company, and we'll leave you in charge of all the software development and sort of setting future direction. But potentially we'll put a board in place that can okay plans and make sure we're sort of headed in the right direction. And we thought about that and we're like, yeah, that makes a lot more sense, right? Because we get to maintain a lot of freedom, not obviously absolute freedom, but you still get that sort of freedom that we had before. And we get to control the direction the company's headed in. And so anyway, fast forward another 8 months. So it was a full 12 months in like negotiations. Eventually we got to a contract that we signed. And then I think in April they announced that, which was really exciting for us.
And so what does that mean then? Like, do you then do you see future growth? Like what happens next?
So the idea is to scale up the business. So make it bigger, make it better. All these ambitious sort of plans that we've had on the whiteboard for, I don't know, years now. And you look at them and you're like, we can't do these with 5 people. It's just, It's not physically possible. Like we are already struggling just to maintain our apps on iOS, Android, in the car, on the speaker, all these different places. And so we're going to staff up initially, just slowly. We don't want to sort of, kill the culture of the company or anything. And then once we have that kind of scale, then we want to try and actually do things for the benefit of the entire industry. So find other ways to monetize podcasting content, find ways to keep the ecosystem open, potentially make platforms that other people can build on, and that kind of thing. I guess we haven't locked a lot of that down yet. We're still in the sort of planning phase. But the idea is to grow, basically, to become bigger.
Well, and so you're now partnered. So then what is that relationship with the partners and their content? So is there, how did you manage that? You're creating an open ecosystem, but obviously they create their own content. Does that impact the ability for Pocket Cast to be non-biased? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a really interesting part. So that's one of the most common questions people had when they heard about it. They're like, does this mean I'm going to be bombarded with NPR content? But the fact that it's structured as a separate company means that we don't have to push their content above other content, but we don't have to remove content. There's not going to be any sort of filter or anything like that. So they will continue to have their own apps. Like NPR has an app called NPR One that's quite popular in the US. So their content will continue to get pushed through there, and our focus will just be on the entire podcasting industry. So they're more, I don't know, that they are owners, but they're not in direct control of the company, if that makes sense. So we still make all the day-to-day decisions. And
does that mean then there's a lot of pressure for you to spend more time in the US?
Yeah, there is. In fact, I've just come back from the second trip there this year. Hopefully we can get them to come out to Adelaide as well. I think that'd be quite fun to see these people from New York, a giant city, come to little Adelaide and kind of experience the culture.
So I asked you to prepare a story, think of a story. It's something that's a bit of an aha moment, business lesson learned. It's a bit hard to ask, but is there one that you can pick?
No, there is one that stands out, and
good.
It's one of those typical things went bad and then they went well type stories. So this was, cast your mind back to 2012, 2013. Like I said, the weather app we had, really popular. But we'd sold it to all the people we could sell it to, and Pocket Cast was not doing well. Like we'd plowed a solid 2 years worth of development into it, and it just wasn't taking off for whatever reason. And we sat there and we added up the hours we spent, we added up how much money we had left in an account, and we're like, what do we do? Do we need to look for something else? Do we need to go back and get full-time jobs? Do we need to do something with the weather app? And we kind of sat down and we thought about, it's probably insane, but we're going to do something really different. We're actually going to take the entire experience that we have, bring it to the Android platform of all places, which wasn't very popular in Australia back then. And we're just going to try and make a story out of going there first with a really high quality app. And I told some of my friends this, who were at the time independent Mac and iOS developers, and they all thought we were insane. I won't mess around with you. And that I started to think it was a little bit insane as well. I'm like, have we done something really stupid here? But anyway, we launched this thing, I think in around 2013 or so. And this was version 4 at the time. We skipped a whole bunch of versions just to make it look impressive. We're like, this is version 4 of the app. It's on Android first. And it exploded. It got so many news articles, so many stories written about it. So many even Apple sites covered it. It's look at these weirdos releasing something on Android first. And just that entire buzz accelerated the Android app unbelievably on day one. And it also lifted the sales of the iOS app as well. That's kind of the day it really took off. And that sticks in my mind a lot, as you can imagine, I guess.
So what is it that you take from that? Obviously there's that, the self-doubt and working through that. But so for you, what was the key lesson from that?
To me, and I think this is a stubborn sort of Eastern European type streak, but to me it's really about not following the common wisdom, I guess. because everyone at the time was like, you can't make money on Android, you shouldn't be on Android, don't waste your time. And that proved itself time and time again. Like people would port a very bad version of their app to the Android platform and it would work horrendously and it would perform horrendously in terms of sales. And they'd be like, look, we told you so. That's exactly what happened. That's just kind of a streak that both I think Philip and myself have, is just going against the common wisdom and just trying things that people don't think will work. And that might be stupid advice. I don't really know from a business point of view, but that's kind of what I love doing, is just if everyone says don't do this, I'm like, no, I'm going to try and do this and see what happens.
But I suppose then the challenge is, how do you make that decision? You know, how do you know how far to push something, when to say no?
Yeah.
Like,
and when to give up on something as well, because I've seen a lot of friends, like I've got one friend who's been working on something for 5 years now, and it's like, do you have that sort of sunk cost fallacy that you just keep chasing the thing that's not working, or one day do you step back? And I think that's one of the hardest things to decide, like in a business as well.
And understanding where the market is, because that's the thing. And Android users were crying out for good apps, so there was that hunger. Okay, so then I also need to do our minute of power.
I'm a bit scared about this.
Are you? Oh! All right, okay. So your first question in your minute of power is to share your number one business advice. Okay.
Go. Ready. Number one business advice, I think for me, is to ignore common wisdom. Like I know I've already said it, but I'm saying it again.
Well, how about, have you got something else to add? Because we've already done that one. I'm like, you've still got 45 seconds.
Okay. Maybe listen to your customers is the other one, and not to give them exactly what they want. I know this sounds really, really high and lofty, like ivory tower stuff, but to listen to what they're actually asking for and try and give it to them in a way that doesn't ruin what you're doing, basically.
That's good. I like that. Okay, so you were fine. Oh my God, we've still got 30 seconds, and you got 2 in. All right. Okay. So we cancelled that one, and so the second one. I feel like your story might have covered some of this as well. Sorry. But anyway, so biggest challenge, you have to use a different challenge, okay?
I got one.
Oh, good, great. And then how you overcame it. All right, go.
So the biggest challenge is when we actually ran out of money as a company. I don't think any of our employees actually know this story, because we did a whole bunch of spreadsheets, we plotted the numbers, and we're like, at this point we actually go to $0. And so ahead of that time we actually stopped paying ourselves. We didn't tell anyone, we're still paying our employees. And we had to get out a version of this, an update of this weather app that we're going to try as a paid update, which was another crazy thing that we did at the time. Apple doesn't really have this thing of doing paid updates, and we tried one. And we had to get it out by a certain date. And I think we missed that date by about 2 days, but we got there. And then the sales exploded and we were fine, like from then on. But I had this screenshot that I took, I don't know if you remember that iCloud photo sharing thing. It said 3 cents in the Shifty Jelly bank account, and it actually synced back to my photo stream. So my wife saw it. And she's like, I've just got a question, like, what is this? I'm like,
3 cents. You can do lots with 3 cents.
It's with 3 more than 1 cent.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. So, okay. But from that, we are going to run out of time. But from that, you know, what was the biggest thing that you took away from that?
I think that the biggest thing that I took away is that if you believe in something, it's okay to go without for a while, I guess. And I know a lot of businesses do this. This isn't unique to us. But I was fine with not being paid for a while. Like, it wasn't easy, you know, you had to cut back in a lot of areas, but I kind of believed that what we were working on would succeed, and we just kind of pushed on.
So in that though, you mentioned that you were doing a paid upgrade within Apple, and that was something that wasn't really done. So how did you go about making that decision as well?
Well, part of it was financial. We had pretty much no other choice. Like, we couldn't have made another app in the time, and our existing app had been out for 4 years, and we're like, now's a good time to try and get more money from our existing customers. And it was also just as a crazy experiment, because you have to, the way that the logistics of it work is you have to launch a brand new application. It has to be like a different thing. You have to convince all the people that use the current one to switch over, and that wasn't easy. There was a lot of people really angry at us. They're like, how can you charge me $2 again? Which you might not understand, but that's how the App Store works. Like, people will blow $50 buying gems in Candy Crush, but they will not spend $2 on like a paid application. You know what I mean? Like, it's that weird. Yeah.
So then when you were going through that process of getting them to cross over, how did you communicate that?
Terribly is just the short answer. We up until very recently, we've been terrible at marketing, and so originally we just thought, we'll try the gently approach, right? We'll put it out, we'll announce it on Twitter, but we won't put anything in our application to tell people. And we thought that was a brilliant idea because we wouldn't tick anyone off. It didn't turn out to be that successful. And then we thought, okay, let's put some messaging in the old app, like leave it as is, maybe put a few extra features in and just put a little tiny message that says, hey, there's a new one. And that worked okay. And that when we found what really worked is when we turned off the servers to the old one. That was our biggest sales day ever. It's basically just kicking everyone off the old platform and saying like, rip the band-aid off basically. Like you've had enough, it's been 5 years, like, you got what you paid for, it's time to move on. And surprisingly, not many people were angered by that. We found that the majority of them had no idea that we'd made something new. And we're like, we put this big red thing in the app and they're like, oh, I didn't see it.
Yeah, I just sort of went and didn't read that.
Exactly. Yeah. So it was that weird sort of disconnect. Like we thought we were doing some really smart marketing type messaging and we weren't. The day we turned it off is the day, we had our best sales day.
Yeah, I mean, and that's just a challenge in marketing and communication, isn't it? Because until you beat people around the head, they don't necessarily read what was in front of them.
Yes, so we found out since.
Yeah. And so then going forward then, you said, you've changed your focus with marketing. What sort of communication are you doing differently?
Well, the thing I'm doing differently, this was a real tough thing for me because there's this thing in the developer world that you meet any developer who's independent, they're like, marketing's a dirty word, like it's disgusting, you don't want to do SEO and marketing. And I used to feel like exactly like that because you think there's some kind of pride.
I won't take it personally.
No. I don't feel like that anymore, by the way. But there's some kind of pride in building this app and getting it out there organically and, no marketing and whatever. It's like a badge of honor, but it's really stupid. Like if you're trying to run a business, if people don't know about what you're doing, you're just being insane. Like you're making it really difficult for yourself. And that's kind of one place I've kind of grown up as a business owner is like, no, it's okay to hire marketing people. It's okay to find, outside influence. And what we've done is we've got a CEO involved now who's really big in the marketing sort of world. And we're actually in the process of hiring like a dedicated marketing manager. And if you had told me that 2 years ago, I probably would have laughed at you. But now it makes a lot of sense. Like that's how you get more success is you have to get into that sort of world.
Yeah, because you can have the best app ever, but if people don't know about it, then...
Absolutely, which I think a lot of developers still don't realise. They still have that badge of honour, like, no, I'm going to plough on and do this myself, which is almost a bit, masochistic, I guess.
Yeah. But so you mentioned then getting in and looking at SEO and delving into that, which I call the dark side.
Well, that's the dark side of marketing.
Yeah, personally. Well, I come from a creative content development side, so but an incredibly necessary one. Yeah. What is your experience then getting into that? Have you delved deeply into that or where are you at?
No, so my experience is now hiring other people to do that. It's still, I don't feel dirty doing it, but it's not an area of... that's another thing, you got to be comfortable that you can't do everything. Because when you first start your business, Philip and I were literally doing everything. We're filing BAS statements, we're reconciling stuff in our accounting software, we're just answering like support emails. And then we sat down and we calculated the amount of time we spent and it's like this much development, like I'm holding up tiny little amount, 2 hours a week or something, and all the other hours I spent doing other stuff. And it's being comfortable, I guess, hiring people or, part-time people to do that sort of thing. So same thing in the marketing world. We're hiring basically people who are experts in the field, like because we're just not good at that sort of thing.
No. So then along this business journey for you, you're talking about doing all the things and building it and you making that transition from full-time work into your own business. What sort of things have you learnt along that process about yourself and about running business?
One of the first things I realised is I'm not very good at managing people. When you have such a small company, your initial reaction, if you're someone like me, is to try and be friends with everyone. So you're like, let's go out together, let's do this, let's do that. And then you realise that gets very awkward when something goes wrong in the office and you have to like either, pull someone up or they're asking for a pay rise or something like that. If you've established this weird sort of thing where you're friends but you're also their boss, it doesn't really work. And I think I learned that in the early days as well. We had a few employees that they were good people, like it was fine. We just set up the wrong structure, I think, inside the company. And so we had to learn. Now, next time we hire someone, like this is how we do it. It's going to be more formal. There's going to be contracts. There's going to be all that sort of thing. And that's a difficult thing sometimes because I don't know if you're like me, but I just want to be liked by everyone, right? Like, please like me. But,
well, I think that's a human tendency.
Yeah,
right?
maybe. But it's a hard thing as someone who runs a company though. Sometimes you have to be, not brutal, but you have to be like a little bit like, this is the way it is. Like.
And so then what are your thoughts around, now you've got a big international ownership, and you mentioned protecting your culture. Obviously this is a process you still to go through, but what are your thoughts around how to manage that? Because that's quite a different culture.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And so our initial thoughts are that we have this plan for how big we want the company to get, right? But we definitely don't want to get there too quickly. Like we feel like if you maybe hire 3 people at a time, you kind of get them settled, you get them working, and you just slowly build up the company like that. Maybe that's the way to go. We're about to find out, I guess, because that's the interesting part of the journey. But I hope that, I hope that we can sort of just pace it, because there is the temptation to be like, we've got all this money behind us now because they've invested a whole bunch of money into the company. Let's just hire everyone straight away and get straight to where we want to be. But we're trying to sort of rein it back and be like, no, we have to do it slow and steady, one thing at a time. That's all ahead of us, and that's part of the excitement as well. Like, we've been doing this for 8 years now, and that's a long time. And it's a long time to be doing the same thing. Like, the number one question I get from all my friends and relatives is, what's the next thing you're working on? Do you want a new big app idea? Because I have one, like, I'll share it with you.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, this is successful. This is what we're doing. And so it's kind of fun to be doing something new, still in the same app, but doing it on a bigger scale.
Is it a bit like, I remember I heard a speech from Mem Fox, and she was like, she constantly has people come up to her and go, I've got the next best idea for a book.
Yeah.
Let's go. You can write it, but I'll give you the idea, and we'll, it'll be our joint.
Yeah, we'll go 50-50.
And she's all like, oh, the idea's not the hard bit.
Exactly. No, I kid you not, I have hundreds of emails like that in my inbox where someone's like, I've got this great idea, I can't tell you what it is until you sign all these documents, I'll be like the marketing businessy sort of person, you just do all the app development, we'll go 50-50, and you're like, that's not how it works. Like, there's a lot, like, the idea is the easy part, right? It's the execution that is really hard.
Yeah, and so then for you, it's really about building up Pocket Cast and building that app and building how people can utilise it.
Yeah, absolutely, and without screwing it all up as well, which is a tall order, because all we hear from them constantly is like, you've done such an amazing job, this is so good, you've done so well at that. And at the back of your mind, it's like, oh yeah, that might be true, but let's hope we don't, screw that up going forward.
Yeah, and you mentioned looking at monetising podcasts as well. How would that link in with what you're doing with Pocket Cast, bringing on advertisers through the platform?
We feel like the advertising space is kind of the sole problem. Like, there's a lot of other companies doing dynamic ad insertion and different kind of ad platforms and stuff. I feel like that'll grow on its own. Like, that doesn't need our help. The kind of place we're focusing on is the other side of that. Like, if you're someone who doesn't want to take on advertising, if you want other ways to monetize your content, like, can we potentially help you out there?
Well, that's good. I'd be interested in that.
Well, there you go. Customer number one.
If you need a dummy. All right. Well, thank you so much, Russell. But in conclusion, can you share with me your Be the Drop tip? And that is your top tip for communication that connects.
Oh, communication. Is it okay if it's really cliched?
Go for it.
Is that all right? You
Yeah.
sure? My top tip is honestly to listen to people more. Because I feel like that's an easy thing to say and it's an easy thing to pretend to do. But you see so many people, and I used to do this as well, when you have conversations with people, that you're busy trying to figure out what your next point is and you're not really listening to what the other person says. And sometimes the people you don't expect to have really amazing points of view, like, actually do. They really blow you away when you just sit down and you're like, no, tell me more about this thing that you're talking about. And I'm sorry, that does sound extremely cliche, but I've learned that time and time again. Like, if you want to be good at communicating, you've got to be good at listening.
I 100% don't think that's cliched, because not enough people do it. To actively listen actually takes quite a bit of effort.
Yeah.
So, and then not only to listen, but to utilise that information to do something, to engage in that. I don't think that's cliched at all.
Yes.
Yes. Well done. Thank you so much. Well done.
Thank you.